Welcome to greeneconomy.tv. I'm your host, Byron McDonald. Today, we will be in conversation with Ntombifuthi Ntuli, CEO of South African Wind Energy Association. She will be going in conversation with Green Economy Journal publisher Gordon Brown. But before I go ahead, let me just play you one of their messages. Hey guys, how are you doing?
Good, thanks. How are you?
Excellent.
Very, very well, Byron. Nice to see you, and lovely to see you in Ntombifuthi.
Lovely seeing you, Gordon.
So, Gordon, as I do each week, I'm going to give the show over to you. I'll just be in the background if you do need me.
Yeah, no, thank you very much indeed, Byron. And it's such a pleasure to have Ntombifuthi here from the South African Wind Energy Association. Just like we were saying off air in Ntombifuthi, that even though economically the whole world and South Africa in particular struggling as a result of the shocks that we've just experienced through the lockdowns and so forth associated with COVID-19, and yet stakeholders like you and I in the renewable energy space are feeling super excited. I think we all just feel like the proverbial foot has come off the throat, that the industry is now being released to potentially to go forward and to fill its potential. How do you feel? I mean, you must feel really excited. How do you feel about this new clarity we have from the minister? This new lease of life we have with the advent of the RMIPP. Firstly, the release of round 4B. Secondly, the RMIPP, and also now the advent just around the corner of round 5. How are you feeling, and how are your colleagues feeling in the Wind Industry Association and in the industry right now?
Look, Gordon, I think we have a renewed hope that the industry is going to start growing again. We're coming from a very difficult period. I'm not going to go back to the period of when we had no procurement, there was no policy clarity. But I think starting from last year, October, when we had the integrated resource plan approved, we started to see some light. And all of this is happening during the period when we were going through a double crisis. We were going through an energy crisis. In December last year, we reached stage 6 load shedding. And that on its own actually required action from all stakeholders, because it was an indication that we need new generation capacity and we need it as quickly as possible. And while we were dealing with that, then came the COVID crisis, and the sector actually had projects that are under construction. We're ready to commission projects, more than 10 wind energy projects under construction to help and resolve the energy crisis. And COVID happened and we had to stop construction, went through a lot as a sector. But just back to your question, that even though we went through all this crisis, we are very encouraged by the progress that we have seen on the policy side of things. I remember in February, when the president delivered the State of the Nation address, he actually outlined a plan to deal with the energy crisis. He spoke about issuing the ministerial determinations. He spoke about issuing the round 5 of the renewable energy program. He spoke about the emergency procurement, enabling municipalities to buy their own power, enabling private sector to buy their own power. And as we go through the year, we started to see these actions actually happening. We saw the determination for risk mitigation, or should I say emergency power procurement, coming out in July, and procurement actually happening almost immediately after that for the risk mitigation program. we saw the ministerial determination for the renewable energy procurement program came out in September, and now there is a very good clarity that we are going to see the RFP for the renewable energy independent power producer program coming out in the first quarter of next year. So it's all exciting news, and we're all looking forward to that period when actually all the renewable energy companies can actually go back to business, because in all honesty, most of them have been waiting for the past 5 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, we're hoping, of course, for that RFP to come out for round 5 as early as January. I mean, I think there was originally spoken about December, and I believe that the president is still referred to December, but I think the industry is really expecting it out now. And this is according to the IPP office, of course, is that that will now come out in January. So that's super exciting. Just before we chat about this great growth curve that we're seeing, and talking about the numbers projected in the IRP, I want to just touch on the emergency procurement under this risk mitigation IPP procurement round or procurement program. I'm not entirely clear whether wind is able to participate in this just because of the short production times, or the short delivery cycle that's been set in that particular procurement round. What is the situation there, Ntombifuthi? Is wind able to participate, or is wind having to just look forward to round 5?
Look, it's such a difficult question that you are asking, Gordon, because we as an industry, we have looked at the RFP. We have identified some areas that we thought might be limiting factors for the wind industry to participate. We have engaged the IPP office around those, and some of those issues were actually clarified in the bidders conference. It's a different one from renewable energy round, from the round 5, because renewable energy IPP procurement program actually procures energy, whereas the risk mitigation RFP actually procures capacity during the period of 5 a.m. and 9 p.m. And as we know that wind actually blows mostly in the mornings and evenings, it actually kind of limits wind participation. But I think it also opens the opportunity for the industry to be innovative in terms of setting up the projects and start thinking about hybrid projects, putting together a hybrid of wind, solar PV, and even battery storage. And so, some of our members are really looking at different ways of how they can participate. I haven't really heard anyone outright saying that they are not going to participate, but it's a matter of how competitive we can be as a sector if we participate in hybrid projects. And I think we will just wait and see how many of those wind hybrid projects actually come up in the RFP submission.
Yeah, look, absolutely, and I think that, and of course, your members and the IPPs obviously keeping all of these things very close to their chest. They don't really want to share their secrets and so forth at this point. But at the same time, I mean, I think from an industry point of view, one would hope that there are some exciting hybrid projects bid that include wind. But of course, there are a whole range of question marks around the way that this particular RFP has been drafted. I mean, I know that there's even let's say differing views as to whether battery storage can in fact be included under this particular RFP. Obviously, we understand that the thing was drafted for gas, and in some ways, you will remember the sort of high level thesis that was drafted by Tobias Nims a few years ago, erstwhile colleague of yours from the CSIR, where he spoke about this combination of solar, wind, and gas as being a solution to baseload power into the future. Certainly the cheapest potential option for baseload, but more importantly, a baseload that was technically possible. And so, and I mean, if you can comment on this if you like, but what I'm observing is that, in a sense, what we see now is with this risk mitigation strategy. Let's assume that some big chunky gas projects are rolled out. At the same time, Eskom's got the request for bids for battery storage funded by the World Bank. And at the same time, you've got these impending rounds 5 and 6 under the REIPP, which will be ostensibly aimed at wind and solar. And so what you start to see is this Tobias Nims-esque picture emerging, where we can possibly really migrate towards these technologies working in unison with each other as a baseload. Would you agree with that observation?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that because this risk mitigation RFP is actually giving the opportunity for the industry to start thinking hybrid, because that actually is the future, and the combination of solar and wind is actually quite a good one, because wind blows early morning and early evenings into the evening, and solar during the day, and whatever gaps can be filled by battery storage. I think the issue here is how much battery storage can you install and still remain competitive in terms of your tariffs, and that's where I think everyone is playing their cards very close to their chest, because it is quite a competitive environment. But it's a huge possibility. I mean, even gas, there is an opportunity to actually hybrid renewables with gas in order to balance the cost, because renewables coupled with gas will actually help to bring the prices down, as we know that solar and wind have actually become very cheap. So
yes, exactly.
This is where we are. This is where we are at the moment. And it looks like this is where the future is going. But of course, if some of our industry role players are not able to participate, then they're casting their eyes on the round 5, which, like you rightfully said, is expected to come in January. And this is when everyone will have an opportunity to participate and compete and actually provide solar and wind projects.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
So turning now just to the wind industry specifically. I mean, so we've discussed, obviously, we all know that there was this, when REAP was first launched, it was just so exciting and these big projects coming out. And then we had that hiatus, but now we're on the brink of the second wave, if you like, to steal a term from the COVID pandemic, the second wave, if you like, of investment and growth in the wind industry in South Africa. In fact, under the RRP, there's a forecasted 14.4 gigawatts of wind that will be procured by 2030. Now that's massive, and I want to chat to you about that. But apart from just closing the energy gap and supplying generation, and of course addressing things like CO2, which is such a critical thing globally, and as you know, South Africa is behind the curve on that. These wind power investments are not just going to be about energy, are they? They're actually going to be part of this reset, perhaps almost part of the president's vision for developing sustainable infrastructure into the future. So, I mean, just from your point of view, looking at the sector and understanding the granularity of it and all the opportunities and all the facets, what do you see as the low-hanging fruit as far as things like localization and manufacturing and supply chain or value chain creation in South Africa surrounding the wind industry?
Yes, Gordon, you're quite right. We're not just about supplying electricity and closing the capacity gap. there is a lot of economic benefits that comes with deploying wind energy in the country. Before I get to the localization part, I think the most important part is we actually have an opportunity as a sector to raise funding to actually rebuild the power system for the country, because you know that the plan is to decommission more than 10 gigawatts of coal power stations, and that capacity will need to be replaced. And so this gives us an opportunity to say, while we're replacing that capacity, what other opportunities can we create for the South African economy? So with regards to localization, I think the RFP is quite clear with regards to local content requirements. In the last bidding round that we saw, I think this was in 2014, 2015, the local content requirements were actually 40% threshold and up to 65% target. And the industry actually achieved more than 50% localization, looking at different parts of the value chain and taking all the, like you're saying, low-hanging fruits, opportunities to localize the industry. I mean, if you look at, for instance, the components that can be used by any OEMs, the first thing that comes to mind is the towers, because regardless of whether you're using a Siemens Vestas or a Goldwind turbine, you still use the same steel tower or concrete tower. So we saw all the towers being localized. And as a result of that, we saw factories being established, one in the Western Cape, Atlantis, GRI, and DCD in the Eastern Cape, Kucha Development Zone. And unfortunately, the Kucha one had to shut down when the industry came to a standstill. We still have the GRI facility, still providing towers. And that's not just the only opportunity. The components that goes inside the tower are actually manufactured locally. I spoke to one of the members last week, actually explaining that they produce the steel anchor that actually the tower sits on is actually produced here in Vereeniging, and that is supplying all the wind farms is a great opportunity. That factory alone employs more than 100 people. You look at other tower internals. There's a huge opportunity to localize all of those components, the lifts, the ladders, and so forth.
Yes.
And then if you look further into the value chain, we also use cranes to lift these heavy structures on site. We now have local companies that are providing cranes, and we now have specialized crane drivers in the country who are actually able to lift those heavy structures. I mean, if you think about the wind turbine, it's 150 meters tall. The blade alone is 50 meters long, so it's huge structures. Leaving that aside and looking at the transportation, we have now local transportation company providing specialized transportation services, moving the towers and moving the blades onto different sites in different parts of the country. And those are the opportunities that we can start to capitalize on. And of course, as we go on, like you mentioned, 14 gigawatts of capacity that has to be procured. There's going to be even more opportunities to identify other components that can be localized.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I guess this really speaks to this issue of a just transition that Minister Mantashe refers to. Is this idea, and I think it got lost somewhere along the line, but there's this reality that it's not about sacrificing or let's say sacrificing people's jobs in other sectors. It's about following the opportunity, firstly from an energy point of view, being at the forefront of the world, specifying and procuring the cheapest possible energy, the cleanest possible energy, and then taking advantage of the economic development that flows from those investments. But talk to me, Ntombifuthi. You mentioned Vereeniging as there's a factory there. Are these benefits really only going to happen in the Northern Cape and the Western Cape, or do you foresee the broader proliferation of wind investment, or wind farms and wind investments, do you see industry and stakeholders on the eastern and northeastern side of the country benefiting from this growth in wind industry? As I say, either from an actual project point of view, maybe talk to us about the wind mapping in that part of the world. Obviously, there's use of land concerns. It's much more densely populated and so forth. The soil there more fertile and so forth. But talk to us about how we can spread the love. How do we get the whole country to benefit from this? From this explosion now in renewables and wind in particular.
Yeah, you're asking a very important question, because just energy transition is something that I think on everyone's tongue, because there is concerns that if we transition from coal, we're actually shutting down the Mpumalanga economy, because it's basically based on coal mining and coal power stations, energy production. But from a wind perspective, we've actually looked at that and thought, what is our contribution as a sector in the just energy transition? And I can confidently say that we have now wind energy developers who are have started development activities in the Mpumalanga area. They are doing wind measurements, and just having conversations with some of them, the feedback is quite good, that there actually is wind in Mpumalanga. Now we are using, when we started in 2011 with the renewable energy, wind energy deployment, the turbines were very small, about 2 megawatts per turbine. Now we've gone up to about 6 megawatts per turbine, and those are tall and able to harvest wind at higher hub heights. And the people who are exploring opportunities in Mpumalanga are actually looking at, if you're looking at higher hub heights, how much wind can you harvest? And they're finding very good wind speeds, and there is opportunities to develop projects in those areas. And if you spread the projects now throughout the country and sort of move from the coast, you also spread other benefits that comes along with developing wind projects. Now you can have the manufacturing facilities, not just on the coastal side, but actually inland. You can start to look at whether there's opportunities to manufacture some of the components in the Mpumalanga area in the context of just transition and trying to retain the Mpumalanga economy and create sustainable jobs in that part of the country.
Yeah, so I mean, an extension of that, I mean, what is the impact of a big wind farm, let's say, on a community? I mean, we know that under the REIPP, there's been there are fairly significant requirements on the part of the IPPs and bidders to have meaningful local economic development investments as part of their bids and so forth. But tell us, I mean, what are the impacts of a big farm on the community? And just an extension of that, maybe just touch on some of the environmental impacts and also how the industry is addressing these. But perhaps just talk to us briefly about those very localized impacts on the communities.
Yeah, community development is central to renewable energy developments. It's also a requirement, so to speak. So if you start from the ownership level, it's actually a requirement that a certain percentage, I think it's 1% of the share ownership of the project needs to be owned by the community. So all these projects that you see in the country actually have a community ownership element into it. And that is how communities are going to benefit for the longest time, because as soon as they start receiving dividends from those projects, they can start doing some development activities in those areas. So that's one point. But the other point is we also have socio-economic development activities in the communities that the projects are built in. So each project within a 50-kilometer radius, they need to implement and actually fund socio-economic development activities for its operation period, which is 20 years duration of the PPA. And that actually makes a huge difference in communities because they look at programs across the spectrum. They look at health and welfare. They look at education, assisting in schools and bursaries. They look at infrastructure, social infrastructure within the communities, and it's such a widespread of benefits that communities are actually getting. And then over and above that, the, the, the projects also assist entrepreneurs within the areas which they operate in with the enterprise development funding, where they take them through particular programs to actually help them grow their businesses. It doesn't have to be businesses in the energy space. You find sometimes it would be a bakery, sometimes it would be a bricklaying company within the community, but actually assisting those companies to actually make their businesses more profitable and actually create the market for them and help them manage their business as well. So I think in a nutshell, I can say that communities, they can even vouch. Communities where renewable energy projects are built have got very good stories to tell about what these developments have done for them. But going to your next question about environmental impacts of the sector and what we are doing about it. Of course, when these projects are built, there is a very strict environmental impact assessments that are done to anticipate what sort of impact will the wind turbines have, for instance, on the birds and beds, which is quite a big issue. So we have very strict monitoring programs. Each and every wind farm commits to monitoring its impact and mitigating the impact. Within SAWEA, we have an environment working group which looks at those issues. For instance, some mitigation activities would include things like painting of blades so that they don't create this white wall that the birds don't see and actually end up colliding with the turbines. So there are such activities that are happening, and of course monitoring, which is then reported to the Department of Environmental Affairs.
No, that's great. And I think that the story of the local economic development associated with the early rounds of the REIPP have not been sufficiently communicated in the country. And I think I think we need to just zoom in on that, perhaps in some of our future interviews and content, just so that we can really tell those stories. Because I agree with you, there's some super positive stories there that are not really getting out. Just another question that's related to that, and I'm going to move on to talk to you about investment in a moment. And this is a sort of a good segue across to the conversation about investment, is the conversation around Black economic empowerment. Are you seeing, I mean, we all know that Black economic empowerment, certain aspects or percentages are required under the various RFPs. What is your personal view about the transition, or let's say the transformation in the sector? Are we seeing enough empowerment? Are we seeing leaders coming through? And in particular, I personally have felt frustrated that in spite of the apparent participation of Black business people and influential Black leaders within the sector, I felt that the sector has been insufficiently represented nationally, specifically inside, for example, the ANC, and have not really been able to exert influence around policy. I've had a sense that that people that have been empowered in the coal industry and in other, if you like, perceived competing industries and in the counter lobbies, that those people seem to have had a greater sway on thinking and policy. So perhaps a comment from your side. How do we as in the wind industry and in the renewables industry generally, how do we grow this influence of Black leaders, men and women, that can represent our industry inside the ANC, inside the policy making structures, so that that our industry gets a proper a fair deal in terms of the understanding and the competition for the hearts and minds of the average person in the country.
Look, I think that the transformation issue is an ongoing discussion within the industry. I remember in 2018 in SAWEA we launched a commitment statement which actually looked at how can we as a sector actually play a role in improving the transformation within the sector. And I think you're quite right in the sense that, yes, we tick the right boxes when it comes to what the RFP requires. But I think beyond that would be, we've got, the IPP office reports that we've got 31% Black ownership in the wind energy sector. And we need to start seeing that Black ownership actually coming through in terms of leadership within the sector. We need to start seeing active participation of Black partners in the sector. And I think one of the things that is actually quite limiting when it comes to transformation and Black participation is the funding issue. We've discussed this, I think it was in this Windaba that we had last month, that the availability of funding and the funding requirements actually needs to take cognizance of the fact that we need to broaden participation in the sector, and government needs to play a role in that. So I know the IDC is playing a role in that, the DVSA is playing a role in that, which is great, but we could have some other mechanisms to actually raise funding to assist in increasing participation, Black participation in the sector. What we're also doing from our side as the industry association, together with our sister association, the PV Industry Association, SAWEA, we've actually launched a series called Developing Developers, which actually empowers, it's a capacity building program to empower aspiring developers to understand what hoops do you have to jump through to actually become a successful either wind or solar energy developer, and what sort of requirements do you need to meet. And this program is actually meant as one of the ways of the sector to try and increase and broaden participation. So it's been going well. It's a 7-part series, ends in March, and beyond that, we're also looking at things like perhaps having some kind of incubator programs that will actually help to develop aspiring renewable energy developers.
No, well, that sounds awesome, and we wish you the best of luck in those initiatives.
Thanks.
So just as we conclude, talk to me about, I want to start looking obviously at the immediate future and then along the distant future and get some of your perspectives on that. But so right now, I mean, in order to roll out this 14.3 or whatever it is, gigawatts of wind generation in the next 10 years, we're going to need some serious investment. And really, this falls right in the middle of, as I was saying earlier, President Ramaphosa's using investment in sustainable infrastructure as a stimulus for the economy. I want to ask you this. I mean, what level of investment are you going to need, or your members going to need collectively to roll this out, not only from a point of view of the projects themselves, but also investment in the value chain? We've spoken about the possibility of boosting manufacturing and so forth, but also just with the caveat of saying, some people, especially in the value chain side, have already had their fingers burned. They've come to the country. You mentioned the Kucha plant. They've set up, they've invested. It hasn't turned out well for them. At the same time, in the meantime, South Africa's our debt rating has fallen. Money is it's more expensive to borrow. Perhaps in these somewhat turbulent investment contexts, tell us about how much we need and how you see that unfolding. Do you see this great appetite to invest, or do you see there might be some challenges? Perhaps just give us your perspective on that, please.
The investment part, I think, when I engage with at least the members of SAWEA in terms of do we have the capability to build this 14.4 gigawatts that's been allocated to the sector? Everyone, I get a resounding yes. Everyone says money is available. We just need the right policy conditions. We need continuity, and we need to do away with the stop-start style of procurement, so that with this continuity, it also gives investor confidence. But the bottom line is money is available to invest. The banking sector, all the lenders are actually speaking with one voice to say they're looking forward to an opportunity to lend money to the sector so that we can build the power plants. When we did our own rough calculations in terms of what sort of investment would be needed to build this capacity over the next 10 years, we actually came up to a figure of about 40 billion per annum just from the wind sector alone, which is going to come from a lot of different sources. And what is great about it is that most of the money is actually coming from locally, because I think in the wind sector, if I read the IPP office reports, I think about of the 80 billion that's been invested so far, only about 14 billion actually came from foreign direct investment, and the rest of the money came from either local equity or local banking sector. And that also means that the money remains in the country, and that actually inspires even more investment in other sectors. So which is great. So I'm not worried about investment. Yes, the investment grade of the country has been downgraded, which is a cause for concern. But have just from our conversations in the sector, there is still a lot of enthusiasm with regards to investing in the sector.
No, what a pleasure. And these things become a self-fulfilling prophecy, don't they? I mean, once you start in, once you open you clarify the policy, you allow the market to go ahead, that triggers the investment, that triggers the economic development, and then that can trigger an upgrade. And then it triggers more investment and more economic development. Then we upgrade it again. So these are this is the obvious golden thread that can be woven through the economy with solid leadership, policy clarity, and simply allowing the market to deliver what is required. So what an absolute pleasure. It's been an absolute privilege chatting with you, Ntombifuthi, as always. You and I go back. We used to talk and have these conversations many years ago, and it's been great to see you leading this Wind Energy Association. And from my perspective, you're doing a fantastic job there. So I wish you all the very best as your members, as you lead and your members move forward to develop and deliver on these massive targets. But in conclusion from my side, I'm going to ask you this question, and then we're going to ask Byron to pop in and just close off the show for us. But in conclusion, just give us your sense of the future. Obviously, we're talking about this in excess of 14 gigawatts in the next 10 years. Talk about your vision for the next 10, 20, 30 years for the industry. Are we going to see wind farms all over the country? I mean, already you drive up the coast and you only drive for an hour or two before you see another wind turbine farm. Are we going to be seeing obviously a plethora of these beautiful farms being erected all around the country? Perhaps just give us a sense in conclusion of where you see us going in the next 10 to 20 and how you see the country changing and perhaps becoming this global example of how you go from perhaps where we are now to where we could possibly be in 10 to 20 years time. And on that note, I'll just say thank you once again.
Thanks, thank you so much, Gordon, and thanks for having me. And just to answer your question in conclusion, I would say that 14 gigawatts, in fact, it's 20.4 gigawatts of renewable energy that's going to be built over the next 10 years. So that includes solar PV and wind. It's a lot of capacity. and it's a lot of development activities. And for me, looking ahead in 10 years' time, we are going to see wind turbines across the landscape in the country, and we are going to see a lot of solar PV in areas. Actually, we're seeing solar PV moving up from the Northern Cape. We're starting to see developments in Limpopo, in the Northwest. And all of that is something that's going to contribute to our power system, but most importantly, it's going to change the job situation in the country. We're going to see a lot of construction jobs. It's going to revive the construction sector, and that is something that I personally look forward to, and it's been great. Thank you so much for having me.
Excellent interview. I enjoyed it. I just sat back. Very insightful as always on the show. Thank you for being on the platform. This is what we want to do and share across the platform. Thank you guys again for being on the platform.
Thank you.
See you. Bye bye.
Bye.
Very insightful interview as always, as each week as we have. Thank you to Ntombifuthi for being on the show. As we say each week, Green Economy provides insights and intelligence on all sustainability related matters. Have a good day further. Bye.